Hello, everybody, and welcome to another live episode of Building Educator Capacity, where we strive to improve student learning by expanding the capacity of our school districts. My name is Mitchell Lilly. I'm the Executive Director of Marketing and Communications for CESA 2, and I am super excited. Today is April 15th. It is the week of the young child, and we want to celebrate that. We want to celebrate early learning, and we have a special episode today with our CESA 2 early childhood learning consultant, Nicole Aldworth, and a very special guest, Amanda Morgan, the author of Not Just Cute, How Powerful Play Drives Development in Early Childhood. We've got a great conversation scheduled for you all, so thank you for being here. If you have questions, you can enter them into the chat, and we will get Nicole and Amanda your questions. Special thanks to Gretchen, our Senior Director of Curriculum and Coaching, who is helping support the chat and questions. So if you have anything that you want asked, if you have a burning question, or if there's something that sparks something in you in this conversation, please put that into the chat and we will relay that back, and you'll be a part of the conversation. So with that, let's get right into it. Nicole?
Excellent. Thank you, Mitchell. Amanda, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited that you're here. I have been following your podcast that you have and your blog for several years, and I saw you at the Promoting Early Childhood Conference in Wisconsin a few years ago. And when I saw that your book was being released, I was elated and I ordered it as soon as I could. It's fantastic. So everyone listening, you should run out and get her book because it is fantastic. But we're going to kind of dig into it tonight. There was a line in your book, Amanda, that just really stayed with me and I feel like has impacted me as an educator and as a person who supports educators. You wrote, play is not just cute, it's not extra, it's not what we do after the real learning is finished. Play is where real learning happens. When we allow it to be pushed out of early childhood, we're not just reshaping school, we are reshaping children's futures. And I just find that message so incredibly powerful. And I think right now, being the week of the young child, I think it's just a great time to talk about this. In a lot of our classrooms today, we're seeing an increased push towards academics, and we're seeing that play can sometimes become more of an afterthought. So I'm really excited for this conversation with you today and how we can support educators in balancing play and academics in ways that really support children's learning, development, and their long-term success. So to get us started, Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you become interested in early childhood development, and play in particular? Like, what experiences brought you to this point that you're at in your career?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. And I just love talking with and meeting with people who are as passionate about this work as I am. So that's always a treat for me. I would say, really when I think about where did I get interested in early childhood and working with children, really, I mean, I was a child myself. I loved little kiddos and I did a lot of work, babysitting and that sort of thing, but also just I was always drawn to young children. Even as, an older child, I wanted to be with the younger children to help they were just fascinating to me. And then in high school, I really fell in love with my psychology class. I found just the theories and the thinking deeply about things that we take for granted was really fascinating to me. And at that same time, I had my two oldest nieces were preschool age and they were fascinating to me. So all of these things at the same time, it was just really fun and exciting, but really fascinating at the same time. So I then went to college. I studied elementary and early childhood education. I did a dual major. And it's funny to me looking back now because I went in initially in elementary education and I was trying to decide, do I want to add the early childhood side or not? I wasn't really sure, which is funny to me now because it's my jam. Those are my people.
Right.
Um, and I went to there was a lab preschool at the university. It's at Utah State University, fantastic program. And I thought, let me go watch the lab preschool from the little observation booth and see if this is something I'm interested in. And I fell in love with it. And especially reflecting on that title, Not Just Cute, part of my hesitancy was I thought, I'm not into this like sing-songy, sicky sweet, cutesy thing that I had kind of thought was what preschool was about, early childhood. And I thought that's not really me. And I went and watched in that observation booth and I watched this master teacher and thought, well, that I can do. I can do that. And she was just real and she was just rooted in really high quality practice and connecting with children in meaningful ways, not cutesy production types of ways. So that was another level where I thought, okay, let me go into the early childhood side of this as well. And especially with that mentorship, the experience that I had there, I think shaped so much of who I am as a professional because it was so rooted in the research, in best practice, in respectful practices. And I think then from that, then I did my graduate degree, master's degree in human development, focusing on child development. So again, kind of wrapping together those two pieces of not just educating children, but doing it in a way that fit in with what we know about their development, about how they learn and grow. And even in that experience, recognizing that sometimes those aren't connected to mind. In fact, I had a professor, one of my first graduate school professors teaching basic development class. And I remember him saying, you have a really good grasp of developmental theory for somebody who came from the education department. And I thought, what in the world? Like that seemed bizarre to me. Why was somebody with an education background? Why is that surprising to him? And so I just always felt like that they should go together, that all those things that I loved in those classes, all those developmental theories and things we were learning about, I kept thinking it was fascinating to me and got me so excited. And I knew this is the kind of work I was passionate about. But the thought that kept coming to my mind was this doesn't matter if the people who work with the children don't get that same information, that it's fun to sit in this classroom and talk about research and theory. But what does it matter if that information doesn't get to the people who are actually with the children? So that was a lot of what I think sparked my love for what I do, is working with young children, but also working with the people and the systems that are serving them to make sure that it's connected with how they truly learn and grow, and doing it in a way that's respectful of children and their humanity and their development, and not just the checkbox system of I don't know, the metrics of education. While those can be really important, that wasn't motivating to me. It was the human development side and making sure that that was connected to it. So that's a long portion of my journey and what got me fascinated with early childhood education. I just am passionate about young children and about people, and I find it fascinating and it lights me up, but I just also just feel like it's the story of us as people. It's how we come to be. So it's fascinating to me. And I think the play side, a lot of it is that same that background, learning at Utah State University at their lab preschool. That was when I did my graduate work. I was able to work in that lab school as a directing one of those labs with the student teachers that would come through there, not of the whole lab, but of my lab classroom. And it was rooted in those theories of play and really great practice. And then as I moved on from there through my career, I kind of started with this assumption that this is what everybody knows, because this is what I was taught in my preparation. So clearly, this is just common sense, common knowledge. And it was this realization that it's not. It's not always. It's not a frictionless process. I came from a lab program that was designed to follow those kinds of processes, designed to align with research. That's what they did. And so then to step into this, I guess, quote unquote, real world and realize that's not the design of every program, and the things I took for granted, having gone through that program, are not always common knowledge, not always understood, not always applied. And so just really lit me up to bring those messages that had served me so well and had been so much of the formative process of me as becoming a professional, to be able to share that with other people. It's just really exciting.
I love that. Amanda, I'm realizing why I respect you so much. First of all, when you said that psychology was your favorite class in high school, me too. That was one that got me. But my background, my original degree was in early childhood special ed, and with that, just huge focus on development. So that's where I start also, right? I feel
Hmm.
like child development has to be at the forefront of all the work we do. It's not about just cutesy activities, it's about moving kids forward in their development and honoring where they're at this moment, right?
Hmm.
So thank you for sharing all that. That really helps kind of ground us in who you are and what you value. So I appreciate that. Um, you know, as I was kind of saying, I've been an educator, an early educator, really for 26 years now. And in that time, I've seen such a shift towards academic focus, just like really slowly, but at the point where now it's just glaring, right? So earlier and earlier focus on academics. And I know that so many early educators that I speak to, whether we're talking preschool, 3-year-old preschool, 4-year-old 4K, or even kindergarten, right? They're feeling so much of that academic pressure right now. So, from your perspective, how did we get here to this point, and how can we begin to shift that thinking from play versus academics, right? That we have to pick and choose one or the other, to really seeing play as the foundation for academic learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the question about how we got here, that could be a whole book in itself, I think. I know
Right?
I know one place where we see a big shift is back with like the space race, back to Sputnik, all of those things, right? That the United States and Russia at the time, or the Soviet Union at the time, were in this race to get to space, and it became kind of a proxy for who's doing it right, who's educating right, and who's getting ahead in technology and all of those things. But it also began to represent um, not just who's ahead, but that represents our safety economically, militarily. All those things are resting on getting ahead, right? And so when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik first, there was this collective panic attack in the United States that we weren't doing enough. And so two things to me stand out that happened there that created one of our first big shifts in education. One was that there was actual talk about, that we're behind. So you begin that deficit conversation, right? We're behind. Soviet Union's ahead. They're doing it right. We're doing it wrong. And there was actually one fairly prominent person who essentially said it's because our children are finger painting while they're doing math, basically. So it was one of these first things saying, this isn't going to cut it. We can't just have them finger painting and playing with Play-Doh. Let's just get them to math sooner, faster, sooner, faster. And it was wrapped up in fear and comparison and things that really aren't where we make our best decisions, right? Not just facts and research, but fear and comparison. And with that, I think again, with the best of intentions, a lot of some politicians who had been trying to get more funding to education, so that's a good thing. They saw this as an opportunity to then, they weren't getting a lot of traction trying to get more funding for education, so they wrapped it up in defense, basically. It's our national security. And that was the language that they needed. And in that context, to get people on board, to get more funding. And that's the good news side. But then the bad news side is, again, it's wrapped up in national defense and security and fear and comparison and all of those other things. So I think we have a long story of good people with good intentions and not all the best information. So we have this good intention, but then it starts to make some shifts in defining what education's meant to be and wrapping it up in our fears rather than research and facts. And you just see that happening over and over again, right? We talk about No Child Left Behind or a million other types of initiatives that have had the best of intentions and maybe in some ways worked or served different purposes, but ultimately are some really unfortunate assumptions or a lack of information, and at the end of the day are usually wrapped up in comparison and fear rather than research and facts. So I think that's a shortened version of a very long story of good intentions that are missing good information. And so that has created this somewhat gradual and sometimes fast cultural shifts that cause us to look at childhood and early education differently, to go from what you and I talked about of a developmental, respectful approach to something that needs to be controlled more, that is part of our safety and security, that's wrapped up in fear and comparison. And so I think we see those shifts over and over, and a lot of different things will light them up, like Sputnik, or different shifts in technology that we're seeing right now. Some of those can then impact the way that we look at early childhood. And part of what happens is, I think overall, we have this idea that's kind of a top-down model of learning, that if this is our fear or this is where we need to get to be, then let's reverse engineer it and just trickle it all down to our youngest learners. And you and I, coming from a developmental perspective, know that that's not how it works, that development actually starts from a foundation working up, not backwards reverse engineering, right? And play is part of that foundation. That good supportive development creates this strong foundation that literally, if we think about foundations, if you skip over these foundational aspects, it's like building a house without a foundation. It can look really nice. We can do a lot of performative, academic, quote unquote, things, and we can make it look like learning is happening, and we can check boxes and make it look good and have nice metrics. And then without that foundation, that's going to crumble. We see that we have various different ways that it can reverse, that they aren't doing as well anymore, that it crumbles, that we find that it was just performance, not actual understanding. So we've seen a shift that's happened, and we talked earlier. One piece of research that's really interesting to me, there's a paper where they talk about why early childhood is becoming less effective, is kind of the question, is the title, which got my attention, of course. And essentially, I mean, it's not even part of the research. This is the statement part. And then they make their assumptions and their research-based assumptions on why it is. But they just said the facts are, before 2000, we had more impact from our early childhood programs. So the difference between children who were in early childhood and those who were not, we just saw a bigger effect size, bigger impact from those early childhood programs than we do for programs after 2000. And so the question of the paper is, why is that? Why is it not as effective? Why is it not having as much of an impact? We start to see fade out. We see just a variety of measures from a variety of programs that say, there just isn't as much of an impact as, say, those early 1960s or anything pre-2000 that we talk about, the Perry Preschool Project and the Abecedarian Project, and these really, I call them gold standard programs that we tend to base our approach to early childhood. I tell people, these are the studies that even if you haven't heard of them, you've heard of them because they're in the footnotes of every funding proposal for any early childhood program. And yet we're not seeing effects that are as big as those programs. And so this group looked at that, and it looked at these various studies that had come out pre-2000 and post-2000. And I look at it as a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is that we have other ways that we're meeting the needs of our youngest learners. And so that's going to diminish some of the effects. So some of those things that children could only access through access to an early childhood program, so some of those nutritional aspects or parent services could only be accessed through some of these early childhood programs. And now, for the most part, we have some better access for children. And so that's going to diminish some of the impact. And I think that's good. We're getting it to more children. So good news there. But the bad news is that this is where it comes back to your question, is that they said what we're teaching and how we're teaching it has shifted, and it's less effective. And I think it's shifted in large part because of those cultural assumptions, those anxieties and fears, and our assumptions that because technology has changed, then development has changed, which isn't true. And so we've shifted based on all of these assumptions, we've shifted how we teach, which is becoming more and more direct instruction. Everybody sit down, whole group, listen while I talk to you, which we have lots of studies that tell us is less effective. We already know that. And then what we teach, they're saying, tends to be more and more in this quote unquote academic. I always put it in quotes because there is foundational academic learning happening, but that we're teaching it in a more cut and dry, direct instruction, drill and kill type of a format, right? And so we have lots of research that tells us we're taking these anxieties and changing how and what we do in the early childhood classroom. And it's just not as effective. So it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We have these anxieties that our children won't get what they need from the early years. And so we change these programs actually in the ways that are less helpful, that are less supportive for our young children. They need those early childhood experiences that are supporting their development, not just academic check boxes. And we have research that tells us that it's detrimental to them when we skip over the development and just give them check boxes. And we just know that we know that that's a fact. And so we just need to pay attention to go back to the drawing board, back to the research, back to the basics, and see how do they need to be taught and what do they need to be taught, and how can we create programs that are respectful of what we know about how children learn and grow, so that we can truly serve them better, which then will serve to abate some of those anxieties that we're feeding with our unfortunate choices. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And I love your analogy of building the house without a foundation, right? Um, because absolutely, like I always say, I can want my 9-month-old to walk, but they are just not ready. The foundational pieces aren't there. It's not going to happen, right? And I think everybody knows that, but then we think of other things once kids are 4 or 5, right? And we put expectations there without thinking about almost those hidden foundational skills, right? That are under the surface that we don't always see. So thank you.
Absolutely.
That's so helpful that you say that. And then I think of it's 2026. I've been teaching since
Right.
2000, right? So that does show that decline since I've become a teacher.
And I'm sure you saw a lot of that shift just in those 26
Oh,
years. I mean, they put
absolutely.
2000 on it, but it's not like there was this cut and drive, everything changed.
Yeah,
But you can see that shift throughout.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, kind of building on that, what are some of the most important skills that you would say children are developing through play that directly supports literacy, math, and social emotional development? Because you talked about that, right? Just because we're not doing uh, instruction through direct instruction, we're still doing that through play. So, what are those skills that kids can develop through play that are kind of what we would think of as more academic or like life skills that kids are going to need
Yeah.
for school success?
I think one of the biggest parts is just what you mentioned, those life skills, the soft skills, the things that aren't on the checklist, the things that aren't on the standardized test, that
Mhm.
those are the things on a lot of levels, right? First of all, those are the things that I see in research that are not fading out over time. So the research that looks at those soft skills, social skills, problem solving, critical thinking, communication, those are the skills that persist into early adulthood. So we see differences for children who develop those skills. They're doing better all the way into their early 20s, and we see it. Whereas some of those academic skills, we see some fade out. And that doesn't mean they don't matter, but it just tells me that those soft skills are really, really important and they're critical in that phase. Those are also the skills that we're seeing and hearing more and more. And I think increasingly as we hear about technology, those are the things that we're hearing from business leaders and university, academia leaders. People are saying these are the skills we need our young people to have. We need them to have the human skills, right? Of working as a team, having leadership, being creative, all of these soft skills. And so I find it really interesting that sometimes we have this conversation that technology is shifting. We need to push more technology into our education experiences. And I would say, based on the things I see, we need to push more of these soft skills for our young learners. The technology is going to keep changing and they're going to have exposure to it, but the soft skills are what are often being pushed out. And so that's a big part. So in play, it's just ideal. I don't think there is a worksheet in existence that can teach those soft skills. But when you have children working with each other, trying to build things, create things, asking questions of each other, creating a story in the block area, or exploring the material in the sensory table, or building together side by side with Play-Doh at the art table, all of these experiences, they are practicing problem solving, creativity, working together in a group, communication, sharing materials. I mean, there's all of these soft skills that we are aware of and we prepare environments for and we scaffold, but we don't sit down and say, Sally, I want you to practice sharing now. And Bobby, I want you to practice communicating now. It just happens in a really natural way and in a really powerful way. So having play and playful environments is going to support these soft skills that are so critical for them right now, for them in the future, and for them in their academic paths. Those are the skills that actually help them to be more likely to graduate from high school, go to college, and do all of those things that we think are really just relying on the quote unquote academics. So that's the first thing is I would say those soft skills are so critical, and play is just the best way that we can do that. The other is that those other quote unquote the academic skills, right? The reading, the language, the math, the science, while we can still be teaching those in a variety of ways in a play-based environment, and we can teach them, there's this whole spectrum of how we bring in adult support in a play-based environment. So we're still going to have some over on the side that are more adult directed. So in our small groups and some of those large groups or circle time or just different areas where we're having more of what we think of as teaching, that can still be done in a playful way, and maybe have some of those smaller, what we think of as kind of, I guess, little minutes of direct instruction where we're teaching and we know we're teaching a concept, but we're also teaching those academic skills through play in our free play opportunities, our guided play opportunities, that as children play, it just runs that whole spectrum of those academic skills. That first, there's the foundational aspects. So before we start doing, reading words, we're playing with symbolic thought, which is so built into our pretend play. We're building language skills, which they need to be successful at reading. They're playing together and having conversations, building stories. I mean, if you listen to children playing in the block area, at the sensory table, in the dramatic play area, they are telling stories all the time. And so as they're creating those stories, they're using language skills, they're using symbolic thought, and they're building a narrative structure. And all of those things are going to help them to be better readers. And then on that foundation, we have all kinds of play opportunities with letters and words in a variety of ways, playing with letters, playing with words that are going to help build those basic literacy skills. And just understanding that language has meaning, that written words have meaning, that can be woven into so many things that they're playing with. And all of those things that maybe seem really simple, those are really powerful for building that literacy in a real way. If we just jump right in and start trying to drill literacy, it's not going to be effective. We can have children who will play along, who will perform as though they know, and they just won't have the depth. It won't stick with them. They won't really build those strong skills like they would if we allowed them to play with letters, with words, with conversation and language, and in meaningful ways that help to build that foundation for literacy to grow in a meaningful way. And the same is true with math and with science. As they play, they're asking questions. They're playing with the scientific method all the time, right? They're wondering, they're observing something, they're wondering about it, so they try something and they talk about it. That's the scientific method. And they're doing it all the time. And then the same is true with our basic math skills. If you watch children playing, they are talking about quantities, and they're counting things out. They want to make sure they have the same amount or more than or less than. Those things come up all of the time in play. But it's also the really important foundational pieces, spatial awareness that you don't get without getting your hands on things and moving things around. Even understanding real quantities, understanding, I love, there's reference to the fourness, and I'm trying to remember who it was that said it. It'll come back to me later, but she talks about the fourness. It's not enough to just understand the number 4, to recognize it on a flashcard, or to count things up to 4, but to have played with things so that you understand the fourness of something, that 4 pennies and 4 elephants and 4 tires, that those are all different. So letting them play in real, meaningful, hands-on ways, they're building these foundational skills and beginning to climb up in building those academic skills in meaningful ways that make connections rather than just check off boxes.
That I love that. And I was hoping you would talk about soft skills because you talk about that in your book. And in my work, we at the organization I work at, CESA 2, we support students from, early childhood all the way through high school. And we have a lot of conversations around community, college, and career readiness. That is something that's happening throughout our schools. And we hear the term durable skills. And what you're talking about with soft skills is the exact same thing. And I love that you brought that piece up because those are the skills that are so vitally important for kids throughout their life, right? No matter what they do it with their future. We need to build these, creative, um, flexible thinkers who can work together, right? And all of those other academic pieces come along with it. I was in this beautiful classroom 4K program this morning, actually, where they have really shifted their focus to play and they're honoring a good hour of uninterrupted play for their students. But the literacy and math that was embedded into the play was just blew me away with what the teachers had come up with. And it was beautiful. And kids were going right to those things. So and they were demonstrating what letters and sounds they knew, or kind of that fourness you were talking about, right? They're able to talk about numbers and quantities just through their play, and it was just so amazing and beautiful to see everything that was going on with those kiddos. So thank you for that. So when we think about the classroom, so kind of was just talking about a classroom from this morning, but thinking about specific classrooms, when we think about everyday play, what are some small but powerful teacher moves that can really elevate play into meaningful learning opportunities? So, any examples you might be able to give around that?
Yeah, I think there are, it's a little bit tricky because I think the biggest thing that we can do is be responsive to the children who are right in front of us. And so sometimes examples are hard or don't land right because those aren't your children. But I would say one of the biggest things is to recognize that those teaching moments, that scaffolding and support, can move in either direction, right? So sometimes I'll have people say, well, how do I support XYZ skill if this child only wants to play in this area or this type of play? And I would say that our first thing that we can do is just watching our children, observing and noticing that that's the first step, right? Noticing that this child loves playing with the trucks in the block area every single day. That's what that child wants to do for the whole hour. They're just playing with trucks in the block area. And so when teachers say, well, how do I embed the learning there? Or should I pull them out to do this XYZ skill? I would say you can look at it from both sides. How can I bring it to the area that they already love? How can I bring, so maybe it's literacy and alphabetic knowledge, understanding the alphabet. How can I bring that to the block area? So there's ways we can bring letters onto the blocks. We can bring print with signs. We can bring books that are about letters. And I mean, there are books about everything, right? So we can bring books about cars and trucks or building or whatever it is that's going on in that block area. We can bring the books there. We can bring letters, big letters they can build with that can add to it. And we can bring our conversations, that scaffolding where we notice first and then have conversations with them that are meaningful to them that can support the learning that's happening there. We can also look at, rather than pulling them out of that activity to do whatever task or skill area, learning area that we want to be supporting them in, rather than pulling them out of it, I can say, well, this is what I know they love. How can I bring what they love to this other area? So, sometimes I'll have people say, well, I can never get this child to come to do fine motor activities. They're always just over here in the block area. So do I need to pull them out and get some fine motor practice? And instead I would say, well, see how the play can lead them to that type of area. So if they love trucks, can I find things that have to do with trucks that have more fine motor work at my fine motor table, or bring fine motor to the block area? So it's looking at both ways. Can I bring their interests and passions over to the type of skill support that I'm trying to offer, or can I bring those skills into the area that they love? And that means we have to know our children, right? And with that scaffolding, we need to recognize it. I think because the question that I get often is, how do we know when we're interrupting and when we're interacting? Like, how do we walk that line and not take over the play, but still support and scaffold in meaningful ways? And I would say, look at it like a conversation, like you would with your friends, right? That if I just walk up to a group of my friends who are having a conversation and just start talking about what I want to talk about and just literally interrupt what they're saying, that's an obvious interruption. So if we just sit down and start, hey, what color is this? Or what number is that? And we're just drilling them, we're obviously interrupting the play that's happening. So if I want to engage in a conversation with my friends, I'm first going to walk up to the group and just listen for a while. I'm going to observe and find out, well, what are we talking about? What's going on here? And what's already happening before I got here? And then one of two things happens. Either sometimes I realize I don't need to be in this conversation, right? This is not about me. I don't need to be here. It's not something that I'm connecting with, and or they're taking care of it on their own. I don't need to be in this conversation, which we sometimes find as we observe play and notice, hey, they're doing some really deep work. Maybe I'm going to watch for a while and take notes so I see what they're interested in or what kinds of skills they're practicing on their own. That observation is still really powerful. So never underestimate that observations are still part of teaching. That if you're watching and learning about your learners, you are still actively being an educator. From that observation, I may decide that that's the main point right now, is to just observe and gather information. Or I might see opportunities where I can just really naturally come into that conversation. And sometimes, just like with your friends, they may turn and talk to you when they notice you there for a while. The children sometimes will see you observing and then say, hey, I'm building whatever, or would you hold this for me? Or they just start talking to you naturally about what they're doing. And it creates a really natural way for you to join that conversation and scaffold with your conversation, talking to them about what they're doing. There are other times where you might just need to find that natural place where you're asking if they would like some help with something or asking them about what they're doing, but always approaching it in that respectful way so that you're respecting what they're already doing on their own and recognizing that there are times for us to just observe. There are times for us to give more space, and there are times for us to enter and interact. And often they're the ones that invite us in first. So just always keeping that, I would say overall, just keeping that perspective that we need to be respectful of them and what they're already doing, that so often they are working with really deep thoughts and problems. And if we just sit and watch for a little while, we'll start to see what's happening there, rather than just jumping into right away to check off my list of the skills that I want to support. I want to first watch and observe. So I would say that's the number one thing, is to be observant.
I love that. Boy, I feel like what you really just did was you did a really nice job of telling us what is the role of the teacher during play, right? And I think being that observer and being um really smart about that. Am I interrupting or am I actually engaging and interacting and supporting and scaffolding? That's really important. I love that example of with your friends, right? What a nice way to make that connection with kids. And boy, I think of this morning when I was in this class, so often kids will say, will you come and do this with me? Right? They
Mm-hmm.
often want us to join them. But that's different than us pushing our agenda or our learning that we want upon
Mm-hmm.
them, right? It's different. So thanks for that. I think that's
Absolutely.
so powerful. So if you could help educators reframe this into one clear idea, this whole idea of moving away from play versus academics, that we have to choose one or the other. What would you want them educators to understand? And why does that matter so much right now for us?
Yeah. The thing that I say over and over is that play is the method and learning is the outcome. So when we get into that spiral of, we do play after we learn, or when if you do enough work, then we get to play, kind of this verses that you described, that instead we shift it to play as the method or the tool that I'm using, and learning is the outcome. It's the goal that we want, right? Learning and development, and recognizing that play is how we get there rather than one versus the other. And I think that's really important because we know that's the reality of it, that these playful environments, that when we use those playful approaches to support the learning and development, it's going to happen in much more powerful, effective, durable ways. And so if I can just shift that thinking, and even for teachers, it's shifting their teaching, or sorry, shifting their thinking, but it can also be shifting their language so that when they're feeling pushed by administrators or parents or others who are saying, I see a lot of play, but not enough instruction, or time on task conversations, all those things, that they can use that language and say, the play that you see is the tool that I'm using to get to that learning objective, and let me show you how. So if we can shift that perspective, but also the language, it can help bring other people on board to support the playful learning that's happening.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think of, play as that's our instruction, right? Our instructional method, as you're saying, is through play for young kids. That's really powerful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thinking about that broader system, like you kind of mentioned, what would you say to school leaders who are hesitant to prioritize play because they're worried about academic outcomes?
Yeah, that's understandable, right? Because that's the world that they're working in, and that's what their assignment that they've been given is. And so there's a few things I think, especially when we're speaking to school leaders, they respond well to research, and I love research. And so that's part of why I wrote the book the way that I did, with all the footnotes and as many pieces of research that I could put in there to help bolster that discussion, to say it's not just me saying this because it feels nice. It's not just this teacher saying this because they think it's cute. It's because this is what the research says. So for our school leaders to really get their hands and their minds around the research, to see how powerful play really is, how effective it really is at helping us with learning and development. And so when they're concerned about these different, I guess these checkpoints, we talk about third grade scores and sixth grade scores and various scores for different states and different measurements. I think the thing I would want them to understand as they look at that research that shows them not only that play is really effective for our young learners and all the things that it does to support real deep development, is to help them to understand that some of the things that we see that show the fade out when we look at these different markers, often because we're prioritizing the wrong things, and to not get sucked into that, right? That we talked before about those soft skills showing. I love that you used the word durable. I love that those outcomes were more durable. They were persistent into their early 20s because they prioritized the right thing. To me, that's a signal. If I'm seeing it persist, that's a really important skill for me to support. And that when we see some of this fade out, that maybe that's telling me that I'm prioritizing the wrong things. That I'm, and again, I want to be careful, because it's not that those early academic skills don't matter, but if I'm putting so much emphasis on those that I'm pushing out the other, then I'm it's work backwards. It's not going to be effective. In fact, I sometimes use the metaphor, we talk about the goose and the golden egg, right? That we're so anxious to get to that golden egg that they kill the goose. That's the story, right? And sometimes we're doing that we're so tunnel vision focused on some of these academic checkpoint markers that we just look at how can I get there fastest, and what can we drill, and what technology can we use, and how can we get them to do more like a conditioned response because it looks good. But the reality is that we've killed the goose to get to the golden egg, rather than recognizing that it's this broader context of development through play, through relationships. That's where we see the persistence, the durability, that is what we really want. And that's going to give us better outcomes. If we want to talk about metrics and test scores, those are going to be there. But more so, if we want to talk about people and society, that the really long-term things are better supported when we look at that whole picture of supporting development. And that means supporting them through play in those early years, because that's where we see the output that we desire, that's going to help support not just the academic skills, it will, but also the broader outcomes. So I think it's recognizing that we want to make sure we're measuring the right things, we're supporting the right things, and that we're not pushing out some really important things just to get to those that are easier to measure.
Thanks for that. And you really kind of wrapped up, like, even the whole theme of our discussion of does it need to be play versus academics, or can we weave it all together, right? And like you said, if a child has that flexible thinking and the persistence, that is a skill they need in academic content learning, right? Like that is, those are
Mhm.
important skills. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's all supports each other, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Did you have something
I was
else
just
you
going
wanted
to
to say?
say, yeah, just that when we talk about that one or the other, it's not just because we're saying don't forget to add the play, like don't forget us, we want to get the play in there. It's that literally if you choose one or the other, you lose.
Right.
You just will. So if you choose just academics, you won't get the academic outcomes that you want. That it's not just saying it's not one or the other because we want to add the play because it's nice. It's because if what you want are these academic outcomes, you need to have the play in there to support the whole development to get what you're looking for. So I think that can be another thing that can be helpful for our school leaders to recognize, kind of speak the same language, that if this is what your goal is, if this is what you really want, here's how play plays a role in getting that, so that it's not just either or, wouldn't you rather have, it's yeah, you want that, I want that too. Let me tell you why we need play to help us get there.
Love that. What a great message. So, Amanda, as we kind of start to wrap up here today, if every educator listening could walk away with just one message about the role of play in children's learning and development, what would you want that message to be?
Ooh, just one message.
I know,
I would
right?
say that,
That's hard to narrow it down.
right? And I'm such a like a research junkie. I'm like, they should know this and this outcome and this, all this research. That's what, but I think ultimately it's that play is powerful, that it's not just cute, it's not just nice, it's not something we do just because it makes children happy. That's good that it makes them happy and there are lots of chain reactions from that, but it's because it's a powerful driver of development, of humanness, and that we play because we are human. And so I would say if they took one thing, is that play is really, really powerful and that it is a part of who we are as humans.
Oh, I love that. Right? And we continue to play as adults. That play is something you can do forever, right? It just
Absolutely.
shifts and changes, but it's what how we develop as humans and change. Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your experience, your passion for this work with us today. This has been such a powerful reminder that play is not separate from learning. It is truly the foundation, it is the method for learning. As we celebrate Week of the Young Child, it's a good time to recognize and the joy, curiosity, all that wonder and love that kids bring into the classroom every day, and to honor the educators who are supporting our kids, who are creating these spaces where joy leads to deep, meaningful learning. So, to everyone listening, we hope that today's conversation leaves you feeling affirmed in your work, inspired in your practices, encouraged to continue creating opportunities for children to learn and grow through play. And thank you so much for joining us. Amanda, do you have any final words?
Oh,
Or
just I echo what you just said, that the work that these educators are doing is so, so important. And so that I that's one of the messages that I always hope to get across, is that, like I said, I love to nerd out on the research and I see it all over in the research, that the work that they do truly, truly matters and can change the trajectory of individual lives, but also our whole society. And I see that in the research, but I also know that as a mom, I see the impact that you have, the way that you light up children's faces and change their lives. So just thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you do for our young children and for our society as a whole.
exactly. Thanks for that. And if you have not read Amanda's book, you absolutely need to go check it out. It's a really easy read. It's so reader friendly, and just packed full of great ideas and information. And if you need any support in how to make this work in your own program, if you are saying, I don't know where to begin, but we want to make these shifts, reach out to us at CESA too, because we can support you with that. But Amanda, thank you so much for today. I greatly appreciate it. It's a great way to honor Week of the Young Child and to celebrate children. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really fun.
All right, everybody. Thanks for jumping on live, and thanks those that have listened after the fact. This was an episode of Building Educator Capacity. Amanda, Nicole, great conversation. I have a 3.5-year-old. I have a 1-year-old as well, and can certainly confirm through my lived experience that those two little ones are definitely learning through play, and I'm still learning through play with them. So I'm really enjoying that. Biggest thing that I thought was huge, play is the method. I thought, wow, that is such a great way to describe how learning happens and how learning is the outcome, but play is the method. So thanks everybody again for listening to Building Educator Capacity. To hear future episodes, subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks again.